Hey everyone, I'm excited for today. I'm going to do another series of reaction videos. I found these clips and they spoke to me. I think they're very much on brand for what I'm talking about. And I think it'll give us more insight into these ongoing religious debates that center always around Judaism, because the Old Testament seems to be the place where we go back to have the original conversation to even set the narrative moving forward. And the first 5 books of the Old Testament is the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. So let's go through these videos and I will give my reactions.
There are even whole religions like Judaism where you have to look long and hard to find anyone who believes much of anything that is religious. I have literally sat on stage debating what I thought was a religious rabbi who was a conservative rabbi. And when I said something that assumed that he believed in a God who could hear prayers, he threw up his hands and he said, "What makes you think I believe in a God who can hear prayers?" And I was just, I practically lost the debate just in my astonishment. It's like, what does it mean to be a conservative rabbi in this case?
Well, Sam Harris is an atheist, and he's trying to debate a religious rabbi, a Jewish rabbi. Now, something people might not know is that conservative Jews, although the name conservative may throw you off, conservative Jews are actually Reform liberal Jews who try to reform the law, and actually, in the extreme, it leads to Reform Judaism. But conservative is basically the stepping stone to starting to change beliefs about the Torah and fundamental understandings of faith and God. So he's absolutely correct, and of course I disagree with him because he's an atheist. But the fact that as an atheist, he can see the hypocrisy of a Jewish rabbi who claims to be conservative and claims to be a man of faith, who's like, "Well, God listens to prayers? I never said that." Now, of course, if you open the Torah, God is constantly communicating with people, and God is listening to prayers, and God does know what we're doing. That's an obvious fact in the Torah. But if you're going to be a Jewish rabbi and claim that, God is more of a conceptual theocracy in the sky, and there's no actual relationship between the theism of God existing somewhere to God literally being here right now, then you completely miss the point of the Torah, and you're not an accurate rabbi or representing the Torah truthfully. So when an atheist is more right than a rabbi, the Jews got problems. Well, here's another one. Let's hear from the rabbis. This is Rabbi Tovia Singer, and although I appreciate some of his criticisms of Christianity, he's an orthodox rabbi, and ultimately he's going to try to defend the oral Torah, which is the writings of the rabbis and the Talmud and the Pharisees.
He said there was nothing in the Tanakh at all that would be evidence of an oral law.
It's a very strange thing to say that there's no oral law in the Tanakh when the very vowels that go beneath the letters are all oral Torah.
Okay, so this man is so effective at debating Christians with facts and logic, except his facts and logic leave when it comes to defending Orthodox Judaism. Well, look, this is a complete lie. It's a very cheap response to a very direct criticism that the oral law is not mentioned in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, period, end of story. So for them to go ahead and pretend like there's this whole vast tradition of oral law passed down by rabbis, when that's not even in the Old Testament, is a very good criticism. And his response is, well, you wouldn't be able to read the Torah without vowels, and the vowels come from our tradition. Now, this is complete nonsense. The Torah, the Tanakh, is written in Hebrew. Hebrew is usually written without vowels. There are vowels to help with pronunciation and understanding. But this is completely false. If you didn't have vowels, you wouldn't know how to read. The vowels are just a derivative of the language. If you know Hebrew, you know where to put the vowels, you know how to read. This idea that you wouldn't know how to read a Hebrew document if you didn't have the rabbi's vowels is a complete lie, and he's relying on the ignorance of his audience to just put out a statement like that, which is completely false.
The oral Torah, the phylacteries mentioned in Matthew 23, where is it described what phylacteries look like?
Again, a cheap response. He's debating the claim that the oral Torah doesn't exist, And his response is, first of all, to invoke the Christian Bible, even though he hates the Christian Bible, but he'll invoke it when it serves his purposes to prove that there was oral law. Yeah, of course there was oral law at the time of the Christians. The rabbinic dynasty literally coincided with the Christian founding of the church. The past 2,000 years have been 2,000 years of Jewish, Pharisaic, rabbinic observance and 2,000 years of the Christian church. So yes, the Christian church was aware of the rabbis' laws, but for him to claim that you need the rabbis in order to understand phylacteries, to fill in are what classically look like those black boxes that are binded upon our hand and between our eyes, that is a commandment in the Torah. And in the Torah, it doesn't say what they need to look like because it doesn't matter what they look like. In the Torah, it says to have these words. So as long as you have the words in the box or in the case or whatever, even if you write it on the straps, the whole point is it's about having the words. It doesn't matter whether it's a black box or a red box or a gold amulet. It's completely inconsequential. It is not the commandment. And this is just another easy response that you'll hear from Orthodox Jews. Well, how would you know what tefillin is? It's like, no. The commandments are in the Torah. They are clear. And as far as all of the details that the rabbis made up, we wouldn't know all of their details because they're made up and they're inconsequential to the fulfillment of the actual commandment. And so it's very interesting to see a rabbi who correctly criticizes Christians very honestly, but then when it comes to his response from the oral law, he's completely at a loss for words and just throwing cliches out, like how would we know how to read the Torah or how would we know tefillin? These are very stupid and surface level responses that are not actually true and don't disprove anything. In fact, the oral law is completely man-made. It is not from God, and it is full of terrible, horrific lies and awful restrictions and false laws that mankind, human men, Jewish rabbis made up, and they're trying to maintain that to the same degree as the Torah, and it's completely destroyed Judaism. So they better stop.
Do you think that the ownership of other human beings under the conditions of the Hebrew Bible are immoral?
Yes.
So how do you account for God commanding something which you now see to be, or rather permitting something and explicitly and giving you details about how to do something which is proactively immoral?
Because he's not permitting me, permitting my great to
do something immoral.
To do something
immoral.
Well, here we got another Orthodox Jew, Ben Shapiro, Mr. Genius Jew. Well, sorry, sir, but you cannot reconcile these beliefs. You cannot look at your God and say that your God is telling you to do something immoral. If that's your belief, you're not an abiding, practicing Jew. And the fact that the Orthodox Jews would be the first to say that the Torah is outdated or something's wrong with it. In fact, I've heard that as a reasoning for secular and Reform Jews, is they say, well, look at the Orthodox. They have the Talmud. They're constantly changing things and adding things and doing away with laws. We can do the same thing. Yeah, well, that's what happens when you don't trust God's judgment. When you place modern moral judgments over the laws of God. If God says that it's not immoral to own a slave in a certain context, and by the way, the context is specific, and you cannot kidnap people and sell them, that's actually punishable by death, so you're not allowed to just go like steal people and have them as slaves. But to the extent that slavery exists and you can purchase a slave and buy them, God does not prohibit that. So you cannot say that God allows you to do immoral things. God is literally the one who provides us with morality. What a blasphemous statement for an Orthodox Jew to say. To an atheist, again, Alex O'Connor being an atheist agnostic, here debating Hebrew Bible, Old Testament principles with an Orthodox Jew, and he's holding him to account of what the law actually says, and the response is, oh, it's not applicable, it's immoral. God said something immoral. God did not say anything immoral.
Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is hold on.
Massacres which are ordained.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. And
why are you saying Yahweh instead of God? Why are you trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
Again, brilliant criticism. You got to give props where they are due. If an atheist manages to hold a religious person to their own beliefs, if you're a Christian and you're trying to defend the Bible, by the way, includes the entirety of the Bible, you cannot distance yourself from Yahweh. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is the God of the Old Testament. To pretend like there's some evolution of Yahweh and some, God figured out a better way with the New Testament or with later on in history is obscene. It's not an acceptable belief whatsoever. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is the God of the Old Testament. He commanded those massacres, and yes, they were massacres, and yes, they only occurred one time in history. God never condones doing constant massacres. God forbid. The same God that said, do not murder, told the Israelites at that specific point in history to kill these nations. That was God's judgment. Literally only God can make that judgment. No one else can. And so it's not up to me to try to moralize that and justify it. It's not justified morally. It only exists because God told them to do it at that time. And God never said to do that again. And so for a Jew modernly to go ahead and use the scenario of wiping out those nations to kill out a nation today would be completely immoral. It would be murder. So we're not talking about a murderous God, but we are talking about a God who makes very strict judgments, very harsh judgments. And if a religious person who believes in the Bible is not able to stand up and say, yes, this is my God, yes, this is his judgment, yes, that was what he told the Israelites to do at that point, not because he's some other God or there was something wrong with that. No, God's morality is eternal. God's judgment is perfect in each moment, and we have to follow what is applicable to us today, but also to know that the limits of God's judgment are very vast. God destroyed the whole earth with a flood. God rained sulfur down from the sky and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. There is heavy judgment that comes from God. If people are not willing to believe in that kind of God, that's where you get the fairy tale, nonsensical naivete that exists in the modern day, where everyone just follows the religion of niceness instead of actually the religion of God, the creator of reality, where sometimes, in case you checked outside, some pretty bad and scary and intense things happen. And so we better understand that God's judgment is severe. And if you're a religious person who believes in the Bible, you have to stand up and say, yes, I accept this is God, this is his judgment, and stop trying to do away and apologize for God's judgment and pretend like you understand morality better than the giver of morality himself. Lord God, Yahweh, creator of heaven and earth, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Torah, and the God who we are still accountable every moment in this present moment. He is God, and religious people need to start taking accountability for their own beliefs and stop letting atheists dominate them with their own religion, because that's pretty pathetic.